Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to tank Algeth'ar Academy. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, before we jump just right into this is the route and approach I like to use with pugs to make things easier for uncoordinated groups, pickup group, in which I expect people to make some mistakes. This isn't necessarily the best possible route in an organized group, but this isn't the MDI, it's fine, it's week one, it's like relatively low level keys, it's mainly just about making things easy for everyone. I used to say this was 4 keys from +2 to +25, but with the key level squish, we'll say it's more like for +2 to +12. If your group is good and well organized, you can get more aggressive with pulls, make more double and triple pulls, and you should do that. Okay, now let's get into it. As for maybe the most important thing, certainly the first thing, when should you Bloodlust? You really have a couple of options for your first Bloodlust. In this place, you can either pull all of the trash in the very first room and Bloodlust all of that. I like that, especially on fortified weeks. Or you can hold it for the first boss, which it is Tyrannical week right now, so holding it for the very first boss, which is only at most 2 pulls into the dungeon. That also works as an option, and then after that you basically just want to send it on bosses as it becomes available. So realistically it won't be available for the second boss, Crawth, the big bird. It'll be available probably for the third boss if you're going relatively well, moving through fairly quickly, and then potentially not available for the final boss at all. That's kind of ideal, that means you're zipping. If it is available like several pulls before Vexamus, like quite a bit beforehand, if you're getting to having Bloodlust back up before you make it to the bridge after Crawth, then maybe you burn it on some trash and just do a much larger pull, and then you'll have it up on Echo of Doragosa, end of the dungeon. Not really that difficult of a fight, but nice to kind of get that fight over quickly instead of having it really last a long time and snowball. Now I just kind of want to look at my MDT route here, and this is the approach that I like to take for, again, especially early on in the season when things are a little bit more baby. I kind of do this first pull. I prefer to do it as one big pull, especially, really any week, but especially on Tyrannical weeks. But with people not wanting to lust on the first pull and maybe not feeling super comfortable, it's not a bad idea to just split this up into 2 or potentially even 3 pulls if you really aren't confident in yourself. But everybody's got their cooldowns going at the start of the dungeon. You do generally want to pick up I like the versatility pin. It's 5% versatility. That is technically more stat budget than any other of the pins. I believe that's the red Dragonflight, if I remember correctly. It's on the right side. Anyways, you're heading up the first staircase. Come up here, blast these guys into dust, and then kill the boss, and then you move on kind of weirdly through some jump jets to fight the Guardian Sentry, and he is a little bit annoying. He really only has 3 skills, but his Storm Slash, the big slash he does on the tank, can hit pretty hard. It is all magic damage, so use magic damage mitigation as appropriate. Anti-magic shell, spell, reflection, shield, spell block, that sort of thing. The main thing with this guy is you kind of want to pull him toward a corner, kind of just pillar hump him basically, sort of treat it like a PvP fight. The only real irritating thing is the deadly winds tornadoes that he will throw on the ground will kind of force you to move around from pillar to pillar instead of just camping in one spot the whole time. Then when you jump over to Crawth's platform, you'll have sets of eagles. The first one will have no elites in it, the second will have 1, and the third will have 2. You want to interrupt. They have a cast called Call the Flock, and it'll make all the eagles do a lot more damage. You also want to dodge their gusts, which will knock enemies back, knock players back if they hit you, hit somebody else in the group. So if you're playing like a druid or a paladin, you might want to be prepared to heal those people. And I think the biggest irritation of this set of trash is just that the second and third packs of eagles will descend from the sky. So if you're playing a druid, if you're playing a paladin, something that has ranged threat, it's actually pretty easy to just throw an Avenger Shield up there, pick up all those eagles, no problem. If you're playing a warrior, if you're playing something with very limited AoE threat, Blood Decay, kind of a perfect example, they can actually be pretty frustrating to pick up and get centered at the very start of them coming down. Anyway, you kill them, you kill Crawth, and then you teleport out, and you go over to a different platform out of the Guardian Sentry area, up into the top right corner. You will drop in over here with this set of 2 Corrupted Mana Fiends and a Spellbound Battle Axe. These are very simple. You can pull them together with this patrol or with these 2 little Arcane Foragers, these 2 little worms. That works just fine. One note for these Arcane Ravagers, they have a skill called Vicious Ambush, where they will They have a sort of a cast time on it, even though this says infinite, or instant. It's right here, 2.4 second cast. So you have about 2.5 seconds. It'll never go on you as the tank unless everybody else is dead. But you have a couple of seconds before the cast will actually finish, and then they dash to the target, hit them, do damage, and knock them back. So if you are able to line a sight between the time they start the cast and they complete it, it will fizzle. It won't do anything. They'll just turn back and start auto attacking. They won't actually attack. So you can tank those guys right around the edges of the bridge, and there are 2 of them that you have to deal with, one in this patrol on this side of the bridge, and then one in a patrol on the other side. So you can tank them kind of around the corners of the bridge, and people can, hunters, healers, whoever, they can sort of fight the monster from like near the edge of the bridge, and then as soon as they get targeted, they just line of sight, wait till the cast ends and fizzles, and then come back out and keep fighting, and that'll cut a lot of damage. It'll make that hair of pulls that have those monsters in them substantially easier. I don't really like doing this one pull on the middle of the bridge by itself. It's really not very difficult. There's not a lot of danger here, but it's just a really long way to pull them in either direction. It's like 30 yards of pulling a pair of, or a set of 4 mobs into another pack. So it's not usually something that happens. Also, I do have one extra set of mobs here that you literally don't need. You do not need these 2 Arcane Foragers at all. They actually push you from a nice clean 100% up to 101.78, which is not clean. The reason that I add them in, the reason that I usually do them, even though they are completely unnecessary, is people will walk into them. It almost always happens, so it's kind of nice to just grab them instead. Additionally, once you're at this point right here, if anybody dies, you can just clear the bridge. Like, this is the entrance right here, the quad. You can clear the bridge out, and that'll give them a straight shot back to the boss instead of having to go all the way up here and then jump jet over here and then jump jet over here and then come up to this top corner and then back around to the bridge. You save them like literally like 1.5 minutes of riding and jumping and jumping and riding. So that's an option, but if everybody's alive, you don't need to clear this stuff on the bridge. If you wipe on Vexamus or something, you can, but otherwise, you just do all the rest of the trash in front of Vexamus and then proceed on from there. Now, as for the trash in front of Vexamus, I like being able to double pull it. On a Demon Hunter, I would. On a Prot Paladin, I would, especially if I have Divine Toll available. But you really want to be careful with the Unruly textbooks. They have this very irritating spell, Monotonous Lecture, and if you're not playing one of those 2 classes, you have to hold interrupts to get this. It's a 3-second cast, and it will totally hard CC one of your players. So it's really, really bad. You don't want to just let that go unchecked. You also, whenever you're fighting all of the corrupted mana fiends, you want to interrupt their mana void because that will burn mana from people in the area. Healer, arcane mage, you, if you're a prop pally, you don't want to deal with that either. And then the third pull in this area has 2 textbooks, so that is a lot more difficult interrupt wise. So like you can pull the 2 side ones together, kind of pull them around that middle one. But then that back one, I wouldn't try to pull it in unless, again, I'm playing a Vigilance Demon Hunter and I'm very confident in the group to do a lot of damage and make it a non-issue, because if you can just Sigil of Silence everything down and have everybody burn everything into dust, then that works. But if you're talking disorganized groups with not that much damage, you're going to have to be a lot more methodical, take these all 1 pull at a time. Then you kill Vexamus, make your way back out to the quad, and then you come up and you come right here, and you will do a double pull here. There are 2 Algeth'ar Echo Knights at the bottom of the stairs, 2 at the top, and a Spectral Invoker at the top. The Spectral Invoker is a caster. You want to interrupt his Arcane Missiles and his Astral Bomb. Those are both super important to get. You want to shut that down, and then the Algeth'ar Echo Knights, they basically just auto attack and do Arcane Whirlwind, which is a whirlwind of spell damage, so you want to make sure that you're not in that. Really what you want to do is whenever multiple of them try to cast that at the same time, you want to hit them with a leg sweep, incapacitating roar, shockwave, intimidating shout, any sort of AoE stun, AoE CC, just to shut that down, because if you CC it, they will stop trying to cast it. Once that's done, you really have a choice here. If you're feeling confident in the group, feeling confident in yourself, you can do a double pull. You can grab this pull over here to the left, pull 18, and you can drag it and pull 19, the ones that are at the door, inside and around the corner to here, and just fight them both in there. I would do that if I was confident in my cooldowns and confident in the group, because there are 2 Spectral Invokers outside, which means you're going to need some interrupts to get those guys to come in instead of just standing and channeling arcane missiles on random people and killing them. You also need to herd the group in. You got to grab everybody and get them inside that building so that they're not hanging out here and pulling this patrol. Definitely don't want that to happen. So if you want to be a little bit more slow, methodical, safe about it, you can just fight these 3 mobs in the corner, take care of them, and then drag these 4 inside. But if you want to be a little faster, you can grab all 7, pull them inside, burn them down, and then you're on to the final boss. And then that's the dungeon. Pretty good dungeon. I think it's maybe one of my favorites this season of Mythic Plus. I hadn't really thought about it until just now, but yeah, it is. It's actually pretty good. All right, now I want to talk about the bosses in Algeth'ar Academy, and we'll just go in order of them. We'll start with the Overgrown Ancient, since that's the first one that you fight. And he doesn't really have any sort of facing requirements. There is a very specific positioning requirement that involves the whole group rather than just the tank. But generally speaking, you don't really have to face the boss away for any sort of frontal cone. You just want to do it, so the melee don't get buried. And you don't really have to move the boss very much, but you do have to move with the group when the boss casts Germinate. So the main tank ability of the fight is Bark Breaker. He will smack you, it'll do a lot of physical damage, and it'll make you take double damage for 9 seconds. Really, you just want to use major cooldowns on this cast, and then just be prepared to take a lot of extra damage for the next 9-10 seconds, and that's pretty much all there is to the sort of tank aspect of the fight. I would say, generally speaking, it's a pretty simple fight to tank. The other mechanic of the fight, the actual more difficult one, the much more difficult one if it goes poorly, is dealing with Germinate and the Lashers. So when he casts Germinate, over the next 4 seconds, he will spawn swirlies underneath every single person in the group. They take about a second or 2 to spawn. They will explode, do a bunch of damage, and spawn dormant, hungry Lashers. So the way that you deal with this is, ideally, you stack up as a group, and every second when he spawns the swirlies, you just all move in one direction. You move clockwise. Everybody just takes a couple steps to the left, and you just do that 4 times, 5 times, and then all of the Lashers are spawned in a very nice, tight little pool, and it's very easy to AoE them all down. No problem. The issues can arise when groups are disorganized. Everybody's kind of spread out. People are running, some are running left, some are running right. They're running into each other, and that's when things can get a little bit more sketchy. The first, 3rd, 5th, 7th, every odd time that he casts Germinate, he will then follow up by casting Branch Out, which spawns and add an ancient branch. It will cast Healing Touch. It will try to heal the boss. And when it dies, it will drop a circle on the ground that heals allies and players and removes the Splinter Bark debuff that it applies to everybody, just sort of a very basic bleed. So the way that you deal with this ad is you basically just want to CC it, interrupt it, just lock it down, and that's pretty much all there is to it, really. Stand in the swirly after it dies. Pretty simple stuff. The other times that he casts Germinate, 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, the even times that he casts Germinate, he will immediately cast Burst Forth, which then causes all of the dormant hungry Lashers to rise up, start attacking whatever has threat on them, ideally you, and applying a very rapidly stacking poison debuff. So if you're playing a tank that can remove poison, monk, druid, paladin, you want to do that as much as you can. Being able to use like Divine Shield and taunt everything with Final Stand is very good here. Being able to use Spell Warding is very good here as well. Healer externals are very good. Healers dispelling the poison off of you is really important. Otherwise, crowd controls are just really, really important. This poison can probably be the most dangerous thing in the dungeon now if it's managed poorly. And that's pretty much the fight. You just kind of deal with that, and then it's dealt with, and then the fight is done. Crawth is the second fight, and Crawth did get nerfed in this patch. It has had its Savage Peck direct damage and damage over time component reduced pretty substantially, and that's really good because previously that was the most dangerous thing in the dungeon for tanks, and now it really isn't. I think it's a lot more manageable than it used to be. Crawth doesn't really have any sort of positioning or facing requirements. There are some environmental damage sources in this fight that you'll want to position the boss just so that the DPS can continue to attack her. But other than that, that's really all that's going on. The boss's main mechanic for the group, the one that's not oriented toward the tank, is Deafening Screech. It is a relatively short cast. It deals a fairly large amount of magic damage, and it'll interrupt any casts that are going on while it finishes. More importantly, it deals more damage every time she casts it, and you're able to clear this debuff by scoring 3 points in one of the goals. Goals will activate throughout the fight, and you'll be able to activate one of them, the Goal of the Searing Blaze, and then the second one, the Goal of the Rushing Winds. I prefer doing Searing Blaze and then Rushing Winds in that order. The buff that you get, or sort of the value you get out of scoring a goal in the Searing Blaze, is that the boss will get stunned and take 75% increased damage for 12 seconds, but that will then cause fire pools to spawn throughout the rest of the fight, so you will have to dodge those. If you get hit by them, you'll take a lot of fire damage and you'll get stunned for 3 seconds. So there's sort of a risk reward there, but it is worth it to reset that deafening screech. The other goal, the Goal of the Rushing Winds, grants you Gale Force, so this will cause whirlwinds to spawn in the area, spawn in the arena, and if you run into them, you'll get knocked back and take a lot of damage, so that's not any good. But it will also spawn moats around the area. It'll also push you around as well. So if you pick up the moats, you will get, I think, 45 or 50% haste, 45% haste, and 50% move speed for 20 seconds, and you will become immune to being pushed around. So you want to combine both of these. You want to first, in my opinion, activate the Goal of the Searing Blaze, burn as much damage as you possibly can into the boss in that 12-second period. And then once that is done, and the goals have respawned, the balls have respawned, you want to dunk as many balls into the Goal of the Rushing Winds, trigger Gale Force, pick up those moats, and burn the boss down the rest of the way. Vexamus is the third fight, and this fight I think is quite a lot less complicated than Crawth. Not that Crawth is really all that complex, but there's really only one main tank mechanic on Vexamus. This is a fight that you want to keep faced away from the group. The boss will cast Arcane Expulsion at you, and it basically just shoots a frontal cone of arcane damage, more like a straight line of arcane damage through you. It's pretty easy to negotiate. You just want to keep the boss faced away from the group. You do also want to keep the boss pulled slightly toward one side of the room, because the boss will regularly spawn arcane orbs throughout the room that travel toward the boss, and those all need to be caught by players. They also have a debuff component to them that for each orb you pick up, you take 200% more damage from the orbs. This is dispellable, so healers can dispel it. Also, as a tank, you're just tank privilege. Frankly, you're kind of able to pick up multiple orbs. It's really not that big of a deal. Depends on the tank, depends on what cooldowns you have available, and obviously the key level, but generally speaking, you could pop a cooldown, anti-magic shell. Divine Shield and Spell Warding are real cheat codes, but even just stuff like Celestial Brew, Spell Reflection, that'll get the job done, really make it easy to pick up a couple of orbs, and then the goal is just to keep the boss facing away. The only other real mechanic that the boss has that you have to deal with as a tank is Arcane Fissure, and the boss will shove everyone back, and then you will spawn a series of eruptions underneath you, so you want to kind of drag those around and not run them onto anybody, and at the same time, there will often be an overlap of Arcane Expulsion happening at the same time. So you want to move, basically, if you have the boss facing the wall slightly, like you're slightly to the left of the boss and it's facing the wall, you would just sort of be strafing with your back still to the boss. You would be strafing right and just sort of fanning the wall with the combination of Arcane Fissures and the Arcane Expulsion, and never blasting the never blasting the group, never blasting the middle of the room, not dropping stuff in the middle of the room, always facing out. Echo of Doragosa is the final boss, and she is by far the most complicated of the bosses, but the way she basically works is she spawns arcane rifts throughout the room, and they are basically little circles on the ground that will spawn balls. If the balls hit people, they get a buff or a debuff that gives them a slight damage increase, very slight, and when they hit 3 stacks, they then spawn another rift. So there's the potential, if it's played poorly, if the rifts are dropped poorly, if things are just not done well, to have a lot of rifts spawning a lot of balls, and there's sort of a snowball effect. Not great. So what you want to do is you kind of want to pull the boss toward the side of the room so that when people are targeted to drop arcane rifts, they can run those out to the side, drop those toward a wall so that they are away from people, and so that most of the arcane balls that are coming out of those rifts are just shooting into the wall. You will be targeted by this as the tank from time to time, and that's exactly what you want to do. There are some alcoves in this room, which is otherwise just a big round room, and you want to take those arcane rift debuffs and you want to just run and drop them in the corner and then come back out and fight the boss more toward the edges of the room. The boss also has a couple of other mechanics. She will use a skill called Power Vacuum that sucks everybody into her, and then she will follow that up with a big arcane explosion. You want to immediately run out of that and also make sure you're not getting hit by any balls along the way. She also will cast Astral Breath, which, it's a dragon. It's a frontal cone breath. She'll turn towards somebody, cast a frontal cone breath, don't be in the breath. Really not that complicated of a boss, but there are a lot of moving parts, but it's the kind of thing that once you get the hang of it, it's mostly just about keeping her toward walls. And if you get hemmed in, if people do a bad job dropping the arcane rifts, you may just have to commit to moving her out of that area completely. I've been down that road a bunch of times. You just move her out of that area completely, reconfigure the group's location into somewhere that's a lot safer. And then that's pretty much it. Now you're safe. Now you're away from all the arcane rifts. They will despawn after a minute, so it's not like a permanent issue if anybody drops a bad arcane rift. You just have to reposition and kind of deal with that for a minute, and then you're basically given that space back for free. You might notice that I'd never really said anything about tank abilities or tank positioning, well, certainly tank facing or anything on that boss, and that is because there are no tank abilities, there is no tank facing. It's actually a pretty boring fight for tanks. You're basically treated like one of the guys, which, you know, I guess it works. It certainly seems like a complex fight for like healers, but for the tank, not so much. So that's how you tank Algeth'ar Academy. Feel free to ask questions if you have any, and good luck. Thanks for watching. Bye.